Well, hello, and welcome back to Fundie Sunday. It's been quite a while. I kind of fell off the horse there for a while. I went on vacation and got this mystery disease and got lazy, but we're back, and we have everybody's favorite type of fundamentalist, the presuppositional Christian. Well, presuppositional theist of any kind is pretty much the bottom of the barrel as far as low IQ goes. Presuppositionalism is literally the single worst argument for theism that exists, and I'll state that categorically. It actually, uh, it actually cancels out all other arguments for God's existence. It makes them literally begging the question, because if you presuppose God, then all other arguments for God's existence, ontological, cosmological, moral arguments, etc., even revelation, which presuppositionalism relies upon, are all canceled out because they're arguments for God. But if you presuppose God, you've set up a begging the question fallacy immediately, because you've assumed God in your premise, and then anytime you try and conclude God with rationality, you've already assumed God. So this is a circular begging the question problem. Presuppositionalism destroys all arguments for God, and it is itself self-refuting. So, even though all arguments for God are terrible and fallacies, this one is a step further because it invalidates literally all arguments for God, including itself. Okay, so let's get into, obviously we're doing Redefine Living's video today. This is the specific one. This is a Darth Dawkins clone. He's one of the worst clones. He has the combativeness of Darth Dawkins and none of the wit, whatever wit you can say Darth Dawkins even has. All of his efforts, all of his talent goes into dodging. Darth Dawkins at least does it cleverly. Redefine Living literally just explicitly ignores what you say and just projects onto you. You make a point, he ignores it, and the way he ignores it is saying you ignored the point. Okay, well, let's see what he has to say. Okay, shitty intro. Very helpful.
I jumped in to say I'm pretty familiar with Darth's presuppositional arguments. They're not necessarily his, but so if you had any questions, I know you started talking about how his argument became circular, Crimson Air.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's epistemic circularity is unavoidable. So everyone's going to hit a circular argument at some point when they are.
No, it's not. You can, if you start with brute facts, which is observations, then you don't have to go circular. This is the problem with presuppositionalism, is they try and rely on absolute truth, which you're never going to be able to verify. So that's self-defeating. There are ways to verify things by probability. So observations, whether they're delusions or not, are brute facts. There's no arguing against them. You experience what you experience, period, end of story. That doesn't mean your experiences represent reality, but you can test your experiences. Those tests are not 100% either, but it's better than nothing, and it's better than any other alternative. And because it has results. And yes, observing results is subject to the same errors. However, the fact that we observe different results is an indication that we're not fully hallucinating everything we see, or that there is some truth value to our observations, because otherwise, if we were under full delusion, then all methods for getting at truth would seem to get to the same place, because it's just happening within our mind. Our mind would just create the conclusion that we want. And even if we're living in a matrix, we're still able to learn things about how this matrix works. So there's still a truth value there, even if we're not subject to the full truth. And so this is the first way that presuppositional apologetics destroys itself, by relying on absolute truth, which they have no access to, which no method has absolute access to. It's not possible.
Are appealing to what their foundation is, right? But not all circles are vicious. So the skeptic...
Yes, they are. That is the nature of... that is the definition of a circular argument. As a fallacy, you don't get to have a lesser fallacy. I mean, I guess you could have a more egregious fallacy, but a fallacy is a fallacy. It's wrong regardless of anything you throw at it. You can be more wrong, but you can't be less than wrong if you're a fallacy. Presuppositional apologetics, though, has more fallacies than any other argument.
And then it's virtuous. So.
Yeah, so like the skeptic, they're going to hit vicious circles. So if I were to ask you, prove logic without making a circular argument, is that possible?
Yep, it's very possible. As I just lined out, you can show logic works with observations, and observations are brute facts, so it doesn't have to go back onto logic. You don't prove logic with logic. Logic is based on brute facts, observations. The fact that, oh my god, the fact that presuppositionalism relies on distrusting your observations, distrusting your own mind, should be a giant red flag. Because imagine any other subject, any other debate where the tactic of the other person is to say, okay, imagine, I don't know, flat earth or physics. Imagine if the tactic was against the science. It was, well, you have no idea whether that science even works or not, because you have to support science on logic, and you can only support logic on logic, and therefore everything is in question. No, when you enter a debate, you have already accepted and committed yourself to logic. This is very similar to argumentation ethics, which is a reason why morality is objective, because anytime you make an argument for or against something, you've already conceded that violence is not the answer, because you're making an argument rather than just taking power. So, as soon as you're engaged in an argument, you've already committed to reason and logic. So, as soon as you're proposing an argument for God, you've already put logic first, and you've already admitted that you can't question logic. And it's not even relevant to this question. Whether or not a God exists is not the same question as whether or not logic is justifiable or not. So they smuggle this in there in order to distract and to dodge away from their actual burden. That is the whole method of presuppositional apologetics, is to dodge. That's why it exists, is to put the burden of proof off of the theist claim and onto the non-theist claim, to say, well, you have to prove that you can have logic without God. Well, that's pretty easy, and it's fun to take that burden because it's easy to do and smears shit all over the presuppositionalist's face, but we have no burden to do that. We are not making the claim that there is no God. They conflate so much. They conflate the idea that God is the source of all facts with the idea that you need to believe in God in order to have certainty in logic. And again, the mistake is certainty, because they can't be certain that their revelation or their belief in God, even as he's defined, is correct.
Probably not, but first I would ask the clarifying question of what do you mean by logic? Mathematical logic or...
The laws of logic. In order to have like a coherent conversation, you're going to use the laws of logic. If you're going to have a logical argument, you're going to use the laws of logic. So
in order to have a conversation, correct. So you've already assumed the laws of logic. It's a completely irrelevant conversation whether or not they're valid or not. But you've smuggled it in as a precondition for your argument of God. So that's dishonest. Presuppositionalism is pure dishonesty by definition. Categorically. Because these are two different questions.
Logic are a concept, then you should be able to dismiss them temporarily in order for you to argue that they are a concept without making a circular argument. But if you don't use logic when you're arguing that they are a concept, then your argument's incoherent. Does that make sense? So the laws of logic are necessary. So that would be a circular argument.
Yeah, I can concede to that.
I don't need logic or reason to associate observations with each other. That's just memory. These are just brute facts.
There's always...
If I observe a method being used, and I observe results from that method, and I remember that they're associated, I remember observing causation, then I have grounded logic in brute facts that cannot be argued by anyone. You can argue that they're delusional, but I don't need to use logic to argue that there is some probability. The probability is non-zero, unlike the revelations from God, where the probability is absolute zero that there's any reliability there. Because there is no method of telling whether or not the revelation is a hallucination or a delusion. Absolutely no method whatsoever.
Always a level of circularity. I think with Darth Dawkins, though, he frames his apologetics on being able to demonstrate how atheism is not founded on the coherent line of reasoning as pertaining to the five senses, what we can demonstrate physically, empirically.
Yeah.
And I've already demonstrated that it is specifically, not really. Atheism is just a response to a theist claim. But we know what he's talking about. A worldview, a metaphysical understanding that is not dependent upon God is what he's referring to. Now, this whole thing that I've been describing so far is not exclusively, does not contradict the idea of a God. A God is compatible with it. Because you can't start with God. Any definition of God that you have to start with God in order to reason is incoherent. if there is a God, you still have to be able to confirm him without assuming him in the first place. You need reason to explore God and understand the concept in the first place. That's the problem they don't understand. So it's not mutually exclusive. It's what I'm describing is compatible with atheism or theism. It's just that it's not compatible with presuppositionalist theism.
So, like the presuppositional argument is our foundation is on biblical truth, the truth of God. So that's all we're
Yeah, and you just you just presuppose it with no reason, and you admit that it's a circular reasoning, which means that it's a fallacy. But you say, oh well, it's a virtuous circle, so it's all good. The fallacy's good now.
presupposing. And so we can rationally argue for these things without having to, so for example, the skeptic, right? When they deny God, okay, so in a world, and this is how I beat up Skylar fiction. How do they get truth from that? What is their foundation of truth then?
How do you get truth from just assuming some random book you were raised with is true? That is not a method of truth, just assuming things are true. By that method, you could just assume that the Quran is true. By that method, you can just assume the Bhagavad Gita is true. By that method, you could just assume that the Matrix movie is in fact a documentary. There's no way for you to differentiate between those conclusions. That method can be applied equally anywhere, which means that there's absolutely zero way for you to test it. There's absolutely zero way for you to have a non-zero probability of it being true. It is the likelihood that you're landing on a truth randomly by just presupposing it is zero. It can't be calculated.
So, and if you don't have truth, then you can't have true knowledge. So where are they grounding truth so they can argue for anything to be true?
Well, you see,
Yeah, and by that method, I can just presuppose that there's truth in logic. There's nothing wrong with that by your method. I can presuppose literally anything, and it's just as valid. But you slap a label of virtuous circle versus vicious circle, and, oh, I've done it. I have differentiated it, even though there's no reason. It's just a preference that you're putting this label on.
They
This
were
is where-
grounded on it. They trusted their own five senses. Yeah, right.
Well, but even then, though,
I presuppose trust in my own five senses. I don't actually. That's for an example. I don't presuppose my five senses are accurate. I actually test them. But I could say that, and I would have done just as much intellectual work as them. In fact, better intellectual work, because it's a much simpler assumption. It makes fewer assumptions, so it actually passes the test of Occam's razor, while their assumptions do not, because they make more assumptions. Don't make unnecessary assumptions. If I can just assume my senses are accurate, then I've made one less assumption, at least, than them, because they have to assume their senses are accurate in order to assume that their revelation of biblical truth is accurate. So they've made at least two assumptions. I've only made at least one with this example, but again, we don't have to make that assumption, but we can, and we'll beat them on their own ground. We'll beat them at their own game.
that you're not grounding truth. Like in order for you to
Right,
know
exactly,
that
yeah.
I'm lying to you, you have to know what is true.
Right.
So,
right.
And so that truth has to be objective. And so from their worldview, they do not have access to an objective source of truth. And so the only way that you can get an objective source of truth is if you are living in a closed system and you have something outside of that system speaking truth into the system. And that
Nope. You can have truth with just observations, but here's the thing. You need to observe whatever that thing outside of the closed system is telling you what the truth is, but you have no way of verifying whether that thing is just a hallucination Whether it's someone pretending to be a god, whether it's an evil god, or whether it's a demon pretending to be God, or whether it's just a human pretending to represent God. You can't differentiate any of those things. Your observations have to be assumed to be correct, and yet we know hallucinations can be false. So you're down another point, because your sensations cannot be verified by other people, unlike basic objective sensations. You're relying on subjective sensations. All sensations are subjective, but they can be objectively verified with others, like the five senses, but internal revelation of God, that cannot be verified with other people. So you're just losing on every front of your own criteria. That's what's so beautiful about this.
System can't change it, okay? Because if that system can change it, so in a not God world, the truth comes from an opinion or a consensus, right? Well, so they can change it, and so you can never know anything to be true, ultimately.
And
it doesn't come from a consensus, but you can certainly cross-check with other people your observations. Everything is based on observation. Your biblical truth, you have to observe it. Your revelations, you have to observe it. My version of things, you just observe things in the world. Okay? What's the difference? I've made one less assumption.
And yes, that is true. No pun intended. And I agree with that. The issue where presuppositionalism gets in trouble, in my opinion, is where they have to uphold their line of reasoning in the same context of having perfect knowledge, where they could be in error. In other words,
no, that's not true.
So, for example, what would you say would be a knowable truth under under Darth Dawkins presuppositionalism? Like, pretend you're Darth Dawkins and I'm an agnostic, because I was at one point. It's like I'm facing, throughout my entire walk as a Christian, it's always like an up and down roller coaster. It's never always good or always bad.
Well, if Rage wants to join and we can do it in real time.
Rage, you atheist?
That's not gonna work.
Rage don't know nothing about no
This is way over his head.
That is way over.
Well,
his
okay,
head.
so Crimson Error. Here's
even I would dismantle him, destroy him, and I'm not even that great at that. Apologetics. I'm terrible at it, actually.
well, so you don't have. I mean, it really doesn't have to get super technical. I'm hearing an echo.
Rage is afraid of me. That's why he's not coming in. So he's not gonna come in until I leave.
Yeah, so is Todd. Apparently, Todd Malakote is afraid of me as well.
I will say Rage, like most atheists, do not have a coherent foundation on morality, objective morality, and so I don't think they're really equipped for this conversation. But this is why I'm doing this, because I'm on a crusade in my own atheist community, quote unquote, to try and teach them that there's objective morality. It's not subjective. This is conceding to the theists that atheists have no way of doing morality, which means everything is moral and nothing is moral. So, yeah, we need to get rid of moral subjectivism, moral relativism. It's horrible. It confuses people. It's pointless. It does nothing. It allows everything. And it's not true.
Oh, he's always trying to antagonize me. But then every time I challenge him to a debate, he's, I don't debate fools.
Rage is a beta.
I don't debate fools.
You remember?
Yeah, well, that's what Redefine Living says. So he has no right to laugh. He's too scared to debate me. He'll go on in comments and dodge. He should switch his full-time career to professional dodgeball. Actually, he shouldn't, because his dodges are really weak. But yeah, he's a scared little coward, because he knows that if he actually has to have his feet held to the fire on these points, he can't answer them.
Remember when in my stream the other day, Joe, he tried to intimidate me by posting some Greek in the side chat. I says, hey, would you have, I said, come on, you're talking all that sugar smack. How about a debate? And then he posts something in Greek as if I'm supposed to be scared. So I played along. I started acting like I was really scared. And then Gil
He said it wasn't corny Greek, so it was modern Greek, he said.
Yeah. But see, he won't come into the room. Yeah, whether if it's in his environment or my environment, he won't have a discussion with me on any of the things that he tries to correct me on.
Okay, this is super relevant. Let's get back to the point.
I don't know why. He says he doesn't debate fools, but yet I've had to correct him on many things. But anyway, yeah, I'm sorry.
Fools fall in love, though.
Price, just check the private chat. There's an idea brewing in there if you're interested.
Yeah, so Crimson Air, so it's the argument isn't that the critic can't know anything, okay? The problem comes when they're making truth claims. If they're going to make a truth claim, that truth has to be grounded in some way.
I agree.
And because truth is only accessible in a world where there is objective truth, God, right? The critic does know things only.
He's just associated objective truth with God, as if things can't be true without a God defining it that way. So he's just slipped that in, another fallacy.
Because they are necessarily wrong. So imagine somebody saying, arguing against air. They're saying, oh, I don't believe in air. Air doesn't exist. Well, they're wrong as soon as they open their mouth and the air passes through their vocal cords, right? They are living, breathing air, arguing there is no God. And that argument is only possible because there is air in this world where they are arguing against air. And in the same way, they are only able to predicate because God has created a world where there are facts. So the
big brain energy. Oh, things are true. Okay. Why are you just assuming that things can only be true if God exists? This is like, there's no words for how dumb this is.
problem for them or anyone, even
in fact, theists like to argue about, we need the uniformity, the reliability of nature, uniformity of nature. The fact that things act the same way, there are laws of physics that don't change. That's proof of a God. No, actually, the God is the thing that can violate the laws of physics. So we'd only expect the laws of physics to change if there's a God magically changing them, which you believe that he did, that he just magically spoke things into existence. He just created something from nothing, that he just sped up nuclear decay rates and just magically disappeared all the heat, and just magically spoke flesh into a clay statue to make Adam, and then took his rib, which was genetically male, and made Eve, who would have been genetically male, and then I guess he individually went in and replaced her Y chromosome with an X chromosome or something. Transgender Eve theory. I think I'm the originator of that. So, credit me. If not, let me know, and I'll give that person credit. Anyway, back to the show.
No, it's the problem for me, right? If I would not say that my mind is fully rational, okay? I can be deceived. We can be deceived. So I'm not going to say that.
Then you can be deceived on the truth of the Bible, and you can be deceived on the truth of the revelations you gain. So you're at point zero now, and you reject the method that I have for testing observations, so you can't move past your observations are unreliable. You're stuck there. You're stunted. You're done. It's over.
That my mind is so rational that I can't be deceived. No, that's the opposite is true. Because we can be deceived, we have to appeal to an objective source of truth. Because we can.
But you can't verify that objective source that you claim is objectively true is in fact true. You always skip that step. You need to show that it's true. You can't just assume it is, or else you've just given up finding out whether you're delusional or not on that source.
Be deceived. Now, the critic doesn't have that. So a deceit.
Yes, we do. You're the one who doesn't have a way of checking whether you're wrong or not about the truth of a source. we do have ways of having a non-zero chance, a probability of testing our observations. You reject that method, so you don't have a way of testing your source.
Deceiver is going to rely on that critic's confidence so that they can deceive them, right? Deception and theft. I mean, it's $1 billion business.
You're relying completely on confidence. And your apologetics is a much bigger business. Not yours specifically, but apologetics in general is a much bigger business than atheism on the internet is. And we don't guilt people through eternal hellfire and threats of torture to listen to us. So, again, we win on every single metric, every single standard that you have. We beat you. It's called integrity. Integrity weed.
These, you have a rich relative that just died, and you just need to send me this money to get the paperwork started so I can send you your inheritance. I've just deceived you because you're
literally your method is trust the Nigerian prince from the email. Oh well, he revealed that he has $1 million and all he needs is a couple of thousand from you to unlock the account. Just trust the revelation. There's no way for you to distinguish that kind of revelation from the revelation of your Bible. You have admitted from sentence 1 that you just trust it. It's just a presupposition. Okay, well, just presuppose that the Nigerian prince is telling the truth, and I guess that proves it's true.
Your mind is not, rational enough. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in complete agreement with that.
Nothing you say has made sense.
To try to get across where I'm coming from is that the token by which presuppositionalism exposes atheism as a preference or presupposition itself, and not and being outside of the possible bounds of perfect knowledge in the absence of a supreme deity, is the same token by which the perfect knowledge of there being a supreme deity that conforms to your particular religion, it's the same token that knocks that down. So it's double-edged.
Yeah, no.
Yep. It's the exact same thing at best, except we make one less assumption at worst, and we don't even have to make that assumption because we have a way of testing things. You definitionally do not, because you cannot start with reason. You have to presuppose God in your argument, which means you've already given up testing your observations.
No. So I think the misunderstanding too, because we're not just making something up, right? The Bible has these truths laid out in the Scripture, so we can.
You're presupposing that is true, but you can't test them. I can just say, the Quran has these truths laid out in Scripture. By your own standards, you have no argument against that. And therefore, since the same method can lead to two different conclusions, it is therefore a useless method. Pure uselessness. 0% chance of success.
Read through the Scripture and we can say, oh, okay, God is all-knowing, and oh, God, here's the law of non-contradiction because God cannot lie, and so we have all of these things that we base this. And so when people suggest that
baseless claims, who cares? Next.
That there is no such thing as everyone comes to the table with presuppositions. Okay, it's unavoidable. There is no neutral ground.
False. I've explained it like 5 times now, so I'll save you some time.
The only common ground that we have is that we are all made in the image of God. That's it. There's no neutral ground. It doesn't exist. So in the same way that the critic says, prove me your God, that comment presupposes that God doesn't exist. That's why they're demanding proof, okay? And so
no, it doesn't. It presupposes that we can reason, and that's it. Which every argument does. Every single one, including yours, which makes it self-contradictory because you've presupposed reason in order to say that reason comes second to God.
They're saying, well, how did you come to the rational conclusion that there is a God? But in that same way, I can say, how did you come to the rational conclusion that there isn't a God? And
because your God, at least, is incoherent. It's the thing now which is fundamental to all things. Well, it can't be a mind. A mind is incompatible with that. A mind has to have perspective on things, and it follows rules. A mind has rules. A mind has patterns, so it has rules, because that's what patterns are. There's a constraint there to the content in the mind, or else it's not thinking. If there is no constraint, then it's just everything. Then the creator of the universe is literally just a seizure, if we're still saying it has any resemblance to a mind. It's just a divine seizure. That's what you believe in, if it doesn't have a constraint to it. So this mind must already obey the laws of logic of some kind, at least. And yet, so there's the laws of logic, the patterns the mind follows, and then there's the content of the mind itself, the consciousness of the mind. So the mind has at least two parts. And so the mind of God would necessarily be contingent upon these patterns. And so your God cannot exist. Period. End of story. So even if we don't assume logic or can't ground logic without God, if only God can ground logic, God's grounding of logic has now just disproved God. So this isn't just a vicious circle. This is a burning hellfire of a circle you have here.
that question for them is indefensible, right? And so they are presupposing truth in a world that they can't account for. They are presupposing a rational mind. They are presupposing all of these things.
You are presupposing a rational mind that is accounting for everything for no reason. I don't get it.
Things that we don't need to presuppose. The only thing that we need to do is the only faith within the biblical worldview is trusting, is accepting the axiom, the God worldview. Okay.
Except you have to accept that you're being rational in that acceptance, in that faith. So you're actually doing twice the fallacy that you're accusing us of doing.
After that, there's multiple verses in the scripture that says that we can know. You can know this, you can know that, you can know. So faith.
Okay, so if I just assume that, if I just have faith in Christopher Hitchens, and he says that we can know things. No, hold on. No, just have faith in me. My channel Snake was right. Just have faith in me. I say that you can know. Done. Now, the atheist has done as much intellectual heavy lifting as you have, which is absolute zero.
Faith defined within the biblical worldview, it's not something that's irrational or blind. Now, the skeptic, on the other hand, they want to pretend that they don't have a faith.
It is irrational and blind. It is irrational by definition. You're just assuming it. You're assuming your conclusion. That is a fallacy. And you're doing it blindly because you can do this same method to anything and get a different result. That's what being blind intellectually means. You're just stumbling in the darkness. You're just doing the same thing and you're getting nowhere. You're just knocking into random things. You just decide to stop on the Bible because you were raised with it. Let's be honest. It just seems natural to you because that's what's around you. That's what was your childhood. There is no other actual reason.
Position, but they can't demonstrate the Big Bang to be true. In fact, in secular cosmology right now...
Yep, the math has already done this. Go talk to some physics experts. They know a lot more about it than either of us. Just pure Dunning-Kruger from these people as usual.
That's in refute. You can look up crisis in cosmology, and you can see how the seculars, they're kind of turning away from that, and there's like steady state. There's a few different theories out there, okay? And that's because
No one is turning away from the Big Bang. People don't understand what was, quote unquote, before the Big Bang. No one has a crisis with the Big Bang, though. It's very well established.
because that is not an objective truth. The same with abiogenesis. Is abiogenesis, can you prove it, or is that a faith? The Big Bang, can you prove it, or is that faith? You know, evolution, can you prove it, or is that faith? So they are on this.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely prove evolution. But you're not really understanding what science is in the first place. Science is not about declaring objective truth. It is about a method for investigating truth that is constantly in flux, constantly open to new information. It's constantly, the whole method is trying to correct itself. That's the whole point of science. So it's not making claims to objective truth. It's making claims to objective results of experiments. That's it. And that's always subject to change, which means it's not 100% certain. Your obsession with absolute certainty actually laughs in the face of the concept of faith itself, which is the problem with you saying that you're putting faith into something in order to gain absolute certainty. Again, you can't confirm it, so it's not absolutely certain. You can't even confirm it to a non-zero degree. You can't confirm it at all. So, this is just, this is the most embarrassing position it is possible to hold in philosophy and in philosophy of religion.
World of things that they can't prove. They have this faith position, and it's not rational, and they're accusing us of having a faith position, right?
Okay, so because science indicates strongly in a certain direction, but the entire field isn't 100% figured out and is not 100% certain on every single issue, therefore it's just a faith. It's a faith. No, and these things are not taken on faith. There are scientific indications, and we say, oh, the method indicates this conclusion. We're not sitting there like you are and saying, oh, I believe it for an absolute certainty as a faith position just because for no reason. You just randomly pick it, and we have scientific conclusions based on results. Now, if you want to say, well, you pick your certain faith because it has certain results or because it fits certain logical arguments, well, one, it's no longer faith. That's why it's called faith and not knowledge. And two, you're wrong. You can't actually test it. That's why it's faith. You're contradicting yourself because you're saying, I'm having faith in this so I can reason, but my faith is justified because of reason. So you're running into a vicious circle at literally every turn.
And I agree. I'm simply saying that the perfect knowledge in there being a supreme deity in existence it also falls into that presupposition. You start with that that there must be a God in order for one to have perfect knowledge, which I would agree with. But
it's not even necessarily a presupposition.
See, this is I've mentioned this before, but again, this is a really, really important thing for people to realize when they get into arguments with presups. Not to conflate the claim or the supposed truth, the possible truth that God exists and is the necessary precondition and source for truth. Do not confuse that concept with needing to believe in God in order to have access to rationality and truth. Okay? In fact, you can't. The latter cannot exist, because in order to even understand what God is, in order to even evaluate or make this argument, you already have to have logic and reason in place. Reason is a precondition for this argument, for all arguments. Reason is always the starting point, if any, for all arguments. Reason can be grounded in observations and nothing else. If you pretend it's grounded in God, then it might be the case that truth is grounded in God. However, we need to be able to reason before we know God. So we need to make a distinction between those two arguments there, those two claims. The latter being absolutely false. You cannot base your reason on belief in God.
So when you say it's a presupposition, I'm not disagreeing with you. So let me try to clarify. When you say that one side, my side, right? I think that the presuppositional arguments are good, right? So if you say that my side is the presup argument, it's not an accurate statement, because again, coming to the table with presuppositions too. Are we not ignoring that? Right? So if we're only acknowledging one side is coming to the table with presuppositions, we've already inaccurately assessed the scenario. The critic has their presuppositions. We have our presuppositions. The only difference is ours are justified. And so the whole presuppositional argument,
there's a
it's not a big
presupposition
deal.
in there as well.
They're not justified. What is the justification for that? You will never say. Ever.
For example,
it's not. But the crux of the argument is only asking the critic, well,
if it was justified, it by definition would not be a presupposition. It wouldn't be a supposition. It wouldn't be an assumption, or any of those words. You wouldn't have to presuppose something if it was justified. That's why that word exists. At least in the full scope of things. So, in an argument, you do presuppose logic and reason. However, that's a microcosm. In the big scheme of things, you don't have to presuppose logic and reason. You can demonstrate it. But so they're not in a microcosm. They're talking about the entire cosmos. They're talking the big picture. So their presupposition has no grounding outside of the argument, like logic and reason would. You can have that discussion outside of an individual argument. So, yeah, again, you lose at every turn.
Well, where'd you get that truth from to make that truth claim?
Well, for example, God can allow for someone to be deceived, and so one could argue that with the attribute of that God in question, you could have a universe where if there were no God, then things would happen in a steady, linear, physical, and consistent manner where you could know things. But if you had a supernatural being intervening all the time, then you could be led to believe something that may not be consistent.
Yeah. So
this guy's making great points.
And I hear you, and I would push back in that.
I applaud the theists who criticize presuppositional apologetics, because it is an atheist maker. It makes theism look extra bad. And again, it destroys all other arguments for God, because it makes them necessarily into begging the question fallacies.
How can you really know something in a world if there is no God? Because again, you don't have truth grounded. You don't have a rational mind. Where'd you get that rational mind from?
Well, things are true. And if you observe something that correlates to reality, then you know it. Problem solved. Now, you can't necessarily know that you know it with absolute certainty, but that's why we have testing of our observations. But again, you can't know that your knowledge of God, by that same token, is rational or accurate. Okay? So you can't defeat that problem. Not with invoking a God anyway, because that God could be misleading you. It could not be a God. You could be hallucinating it. It could be an evil God, etc., etc.
Where'd you get that truth claim from? Where'd you get those
He
things?
got it from us.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Even within the Bible, people can be deceived, and those who are deceived are not aware of it. So
Yeah.
for all we know, we could be deceived.
Well, no. So I don't think you're grasping the argument. So again, we can be deceived, right? And as soon as we suggest that something is true that is inconsistent with the biblical worldview, we've been deceived. But we can only know deception only works in a worldview where there is a God. Okay? In a worldview where there is no God, everything is deception because there is no truth.
Empty claim, circular reasoning. Oh, well, nothing is true without God because things can only be true with God. And that's true because I just said so, and I have no justification for that.
Truth. You couldn't know it. You couldn't predicate.
So
God necessarily exists. It's not
agree.
maybe there's a God. Like no, God necessarily exists because
if you
there
want
is
to hold
truth.
that there is perfect knowledge, I agree.
I
But that's
we don't-
working,
Another empty claim.
I
that's
think
working with the
Darth is-
presupposition that we do have perfect knowledge.
No.
I think
We
the
have
dark-
access. We have access to
Yeah.
knowledge.
Yeah, I
we
think
don't have
dealing
perfect
with-
knowledge.
For example, if you come off the
If that is true, you can't know that. Not with absolute certainty, and not with any degree of certainty, actually, because you can't test that.
the freeway and you saw the speed limit sign being 75 miles an hour, and then you come home and then I ask you, hey, what's the speed limit on freeway 85 or whatever, and you say 75 miles an hour, and I ask you, are you sure? And you say positive. Is that a perfect knowledge claim?
Yeah. So we're not. So
let me just say this really quickly. I think what Darth is dealing with more with his argument is not the knowledge.
right.
Everyone has knowledge.
If we were living in a world full of delusion, things would not be consistent. Like with that example. If the speed limit is 75, and I say, yes, I'm going 75 because I remember the speed limit sign being 75. And then we drive back and go, and I've predicted that the sign will say 75, and it's 75. We've just seen consistency. We've just observed it. Okay? That's how it works. Now, if we went back and it said 65 or 25 or whatever, we have proved that at least my memory is inconsistent. So we have shown that my observations and my memories, which are kind of the same thing, are not reliable, at least to some extent. But if we show consistency in the other direction, if we show consistency instead of inconsistency, then we have shown that it is more likely reliable, it's closer to reliable to that extent. Okay? So this is how we move the dial on probability. Presups totally reject this, and so they have no way of even getting past absolute zero certainty.
Knowledge and can obtain moral knowledge even. But it's the foundation or the foundational existence of moral
Ontology.
Right.
The ontology. That's what Presup deals with.
Right.
What
It's
grounds the atheist position on
I
anything.
agree. But
It's
I'm saying
truth.
that under the
And they conflate ontology with epistemology because they're making ontological claims about how you know things, which is epistemology. You can't know things unless you just randomly claim that something is true. big low IQ energy.
The theistic model, you have the same vulnerability. The
No, we
vulnerability.
don't. I'll show you the only point when the theists hits epistemic circularity is when we say that the Bible is true. But the reason why
you have to unpack that.
Well, the
Okay,
only
so that's a fallacy. Next, you can't use that. Done. You're over. Bye.
reason why that. Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Why is the Bible? Why, we have to be able then to demonstrate that the Bible is divine rather than merely human in origin. And I think
right, and that demonstration would be the rest of the argument.
Right,
That the Bible is necessarily true, but even then.
So you start off with a fallacy, and then you say, "Oh, well, the rest of the argument proves." That's literally begging the question. So the conclusion proves the premise. Wow. Seriously, fuck you. What the fuck?
And the reason why it's not circular because the critic decides their axiom irrationally. There's no justification whatsoever for their not God worldview.
You have decided your axiom irrationally. You haven't given any justification. You haven't given a reason. You've just worked backwards from a conclusion, which is by definition irrational.
They can't defend their atheism. They don't have any answers. You know, they are suppressing the truth of God with their unrighteousness. Okay. Now, on the other hand, we have revelation all through time. When Adam opened up his literal eyes,
You can't verify that revelation isn't a lie or hallucination. You just can't. End of story. You're back to square one. And you can't move past square one because you've defined yourself out of being able to do so.
God was standing there, and God walked with Adam in the garden. God talked, God spoke truth into Adam's life. God intervened and sent prophets and was there throughout all of history. God sent his son to the earth so that we can be aligned and realigned with truth. So we have this rich history of God and truth. So that's why our circularity is not irrational. No,
So your circularity is justified by just circularly assuming that your axiom is true. My axiom of truth is true because it has truth. Because it has a history of truth. And the revelation is true because it was revealed as true. I just can't. This is the literal dumbest argument for God that exists. This is moving me so far away from theism. This is the furthest I've ever been away from God because of your argument, Redefine Living. Because you're so bad at thinking. You're an insult to thought itself. Literally. You are literally, openly, explicitly saying that we should distrust thought itself and not use it so we can believe and join your cult so we don't have to get tortured forever.
our God worldview has been demonstrated through divine and special revelation.
That's the part where I think the atheists think that Darth is being dishonest because he won't go to the evidentialist type of argument. He just refuses to do it. So once he grounds their moral positions in nothing but mere inklings.
You can't go to the evidentialist type of argument. I guess that's one part where Darth is right. Because you've precluded evidence as an argument for God because you've already stated as your premise that God exists. You can't then conclude that God exists without committing yet more fallacies.
And then they say, okay, well, show us evidence what you're grounded in is actually true. He won't go there.
Well,
that's fine. That's fine. That's not his. I don't think that's his calling. I mean, he will sometimes, but if that's not what his calling is.
He won't. He just says it's been revealed to me, which is the best you can do, which is the worst any theist can do.
His calling is simply the presuppositional type of approach. That's fine, but I think that's where the atheist sort of he's being dishonest, right?
Yeah,
it is. It's by definition dishonest.
Yeah, I mean
that's sort of what you're arguing, Crimsoneer, as far as Darth is concerned. Like, once it's established that their circular argument is a circular argument, but it's based on a circular going back to themselves, like a subjective contrary.
Yeah, I would say that's the basics of what you just touched on. It
isn't. We're the only ones who can actually cross-confirm with things that are outside of ourselves. You're just cross-confirming with revelation that's inside of yourself, or some book that cannot be confirmed by anyone.
It's that for the Christian suppositionalist, I think they're under the same vulnerability to have that perfect knowledge claim, to say that in order to have knowledge in anything, there has to be a God, which I would agree with, but that's on faith.
Yeah, but so can I? I'm trying to politely correct you again, respectfully. It's not knowledge; it's truth. There's a big difference, okay? So we're not saying that they can't have knowledge, and we're not even saying that they can't have truth. What we're saying is truth only exists in a world where there is God. And because we can, including the critic, because they can know some things to be true, God must necessarily exist.
Well, it depends on what you mean by truth.
Yeah, well, you have no way of knowing that or confirming that, so that's an empty claim. And if you just define it that way, just define God as necessary to truth, well, guess what? You can't just define things into existence. You have to show that that definition actually exists in reality. But you can't. You can't even give a non-zero probability for it.
So it will depend. Okay, so there's two ways that we can define truth. We can
you can't give a non-zero probability for it, and you're not capable of it, but your argument forbids you from doing it, because you've already admitted, you've already established as your premise God exists. Therefore I'm going to commit a logical fallacy and assume my conclusion in my premise. So evidence, therefore God. Well, I've just contradicted everything I tried to establish with my first premise.
define truth as arbitrary and meaningless, subjective, your truth, my truth, no truth, it's just nonsensical. Or we can define truth as what is objective. Truth is truth, right? So for example, biblical truth. When God told Noah it's going to rain, the whole world disagreed with Noah. They said, no, you're an idiot. That's not even true. And Noah said, you know what? I don't care. It is objectively true. It's going to start raining. You guys need to repent, okay? The rain came. So that is an objective truth. Now, objective truth can...
It's a story in a book of myths. End of story. You're just again, this is all just random assumptions.
Not be changed by the whole world or anyone. God says this is true. The whole world can disagree. This is still true. That's objective truth. That is pure, real, uncorrupted truth.
Yeah,
and
but see,
only the biblical worldview can offer that.
As soon as you go back to...
No. The biblical worldview, whatever you're calling the biblical worldview, is actually exclusively the single worst access to truth that it is possible to hold. There is no worse way to access truth than what you're describing. There is no lower probability of accessing truth than your method.
To an event or something that you didn't witness yourself, then you're outside of what I would consider objective truth.
You're outside of the biblical worldview.
I would consider objective truth to be that which you can interact with through your five senses.
Yeah, so when you say... Sorry.
So when you talk about Noah and Adam and all of that, which I do hold the faith, by the way, you're going outside of... See, that's the challenge, is to convince your audience that your objective truth somehow encompasses that which you didn't first-handedly observe.
Yeah, so here's the thing. It's not my objective truth. Okay,
because a Muslim will argue the same thing. They have objective truth to the point where they'll happily give up their lives in an airplane or with a suicide bomb.
So that's fine. That's fine. But Allah was the greatest deceiver. So you can't have truth from...
Whenever you hear someone say, that's fine, that's code for, I don't know what to say. I have no argument against that. Let's just move on. Let's just ignore that. Oh, and I will just assume that Allah is lying, even though your God is described in the Bible as a deceiver, because it's basically the same God from the same tradition as Allah.
From that, truth doesn't flow from a deceptive God. Truth only flows from a consistent God that cannot lie. Okay, because how do you know you're not being deceived? Your God's the greatest deceiver.
Everything that you're saying now, they say the same thing.
that's fine, but they can't rationally ground that argument in truth. We can. That's what we're saying. Okay, and so when you say that you can only appeal to things that we know, now you are relying on your own autonomous reasoning, and now you are relying on your own subjective interpretation. You have dismissed the biblical worldview as being true, and now you're saying that truth can only be something that you can filter through your own reasoning. And the reason why that fails, again, is because deceivers rely on you trusting your own reasoning, so they can deceive you out of your inheritances and works or whatever.
You just described why you can't trust the Bible or Revelation just so perfectly. You can't trust. Let's go back.
Go to thing that you can filter through your own reasoning. And the reason why that fails, again, is because deceivers rely on you trusting your own reasoning so they can...
You filter Revelation through your own reasoning, and if you can't get around that. And deceivers rely on you trusting that. Deceivers rely on you trusting them. And you put your trust in an ultimate deceiver. Well, at least you can't rule that out because you have no method of doing so. Again, you're just trusting the Nigerian prince. The deceiver, the Nigerian prince sending you that email, you just trust it. You have no method of discerning whether what he's telling you is true or false, whether he's a deceiver or not. You're just randomly choosing to trust the deceiver who wrote the Bible.
Can deceive you out of your, inheritances and works or whatever. Go to Las Vegas. You'll see that in action. So there is no rational argument for our own senses to be relied on fully.
Las Vegas? Is he talking about gambling? How is gambling deceptive? I mean, I guess you could... Poker is about deceiving, but is he talking about the dealer? You know what you're getting into when you go to a gambling game. People are going... It is a game. That's the point of the game. And most gambling is not about deception. It's just about chance. Poker's not a gambling game. Poker is a game of skill. There's some stochasticity and randomness in poker, but it is also primarily skill-based. Because it's about how you react to the randomness in the card deck.
It can't be done. The only way is if we're appealing to something that is objectively true.
The brain can be tricked.
So what is common is for the atheist, and I know you're not a skeptic or a critic. What is common though is the critics want to rely on their own senses, and they want to appeal to reality, which
you have to rely on your own senses to appeal to reality, no matter who you are or what you are, even if you're God.
In a world where there is no God, reality cannot be known. Because that same loony bin...
That has nothing to do with your point that you just made. You're just asserting that for no reason.
The guy in the loony bin, he's going to be appealing to reality. The schizophrenic's going to be appealing to the reality. The crackhead on the corner is going to be appealing to...
You are no different than the schizophrenic appealing to the visions in their mind.
To reality. So now we're all sharing the same blurry, arbitrary reality, and we're saying, well, that's where we get truth from, and the crackhead's like, yeah, that's how I get my truth, and the schizophrenic's like, yeah, that's how I get my truth. Oh, well, so now you're in a...
That's exactly how you get your truth. It's pathetic.
Dilemma, a big dilemma.
Would you is there a line of demarcation you are prepared to draw in highlighting maybe a limitation to the objective truth by which we can obtain from God, or is it unlimited?
No. See, here's the thing: if I stand purely on a biblical foundation, then I'm not going to be deceived. Okay, but as soon as
how do you know that? You are just asserting that. You have no way to test that. All you have is your own experience, your own self. You're just appealing to your own observations. And, of course, you're going to say, no, I'm appealing to the Bible. Okay, well, you can't appeal to anything other than your experience to verify the Bible. Because it can't be objectively verified. You can't actually go out and test its claims. The only thing you have would be revelation. And you can't test that either. So you have absolute jack shit worse than what you accuse us of having.
As I opt for autonomous reasoning, I'm going to be deceived. So for example, right? So God told Adam, don't partake of this fruit, okay? This is an objective thing that I'm telling you, don't do. Now, the serpent told Eve, well, did God really say that?
Even though he has no way of knowing whether that's a good thing or not, just like you. If he doesn't have the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, if he doesn't have knowledge of good and evil, how's he supposed to trust God? How's he supposed to know trusting God is a good thing? How's he supposed to know going against God is a bad thing? How's he supposed to know anything about good and evil? He can't. God set him up to fail, just like you're setting yourself up to fail.
That? Does it really mean that? And Eve, in that moment, she opted for her own autonomous reasoning. She said, you know what? I'm gonna use my own thoughts. I'm gonna use my own senses.
Because God gave her no reasoning. Literally. He didn't give her any reasons to trust him. Also, he didn't give her reasoning. He didn't give her the knowledge of good and evil. It would be impossible for her to have made any other decision. And God knew this. He entrapped her.
And my own rational mind, and I'm going to use these things aside from God, and I'm going to come to the conclusion that I can do this thing I've been told not to do, and she failed, right? And the devil.
Yeah. Deceivers tell you to do things all the time, and you should question them all the time, or else you're going to fall for a deceiver. That includes God, because there's no way for you to know that whoever God is isn't pretending to be a God, or you're mistaking it for a God. You have to apply this standard. You can't just trust, or else you're going to fall for a deceiver. You're going to trust. By that method, you're going to trust the wrong thing one day. You can't tell the difference between things you can trust and things you can't trust. You are the one advocating to not know the knowledge of good and evil, and so you are advocating not knowing who you should trust.
The devil did the same thing to Jesus. He says, Jesus, look, the devil strawmanned the scripture with Jesus. Well, Jesus, you can do this, and you can do that. And how did Jesus reply? He said, no, this is the word of God. This is objectively true, and that is where I'm going to stand, so I am not going to be deceived.
Well, where I was getting at with the limitation is, for example, do you hold
I appeal to fiction for my truth.
The creation week being 7 literal 24-hour days to be objective truth, or do you hold the day-age model to be objective truth?
And that is absolute truth.
Yeah,
sorry, old earthers.
Well, hold on.
That is absolute truth. High praise. Love you, buddy.
And so I'd rather not go down this part of the debate, but for my epistemology, I believe it is most consistent to just take the Bible a normal, honest reading. The problem is when you reject that. And
what the hell does that mean?
And no, Smokey, it's not a salvational issue.
What does normal, honest reading mean? I mean, literal or metaphorically?
Yeah, just a minute, P. Mars. So I believe the most consistent epistemology comes from a normal, honest reading of the Bible.
It can't. You could just pick literally any other book and say truth comes from a consistent, honest reading of that. Okay, well, I'm here to tell you, what the hell is this, hunting humans? I'm a little disturbed by that. Let's go back to this embarrassing person. I'm here to tell you that the most reliable way to truth is an open, consistent, and honest viewing of this channel. And with that, I thank you for joining me on our, the 10th Fundie Sunday. And I'm going to try and be more consistent about these. So, there you go. Thank you for joining us today. And, there you go, folks. Dog bless.